Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and this is the second in the series for, or third, actually, I think, for the Master's Student Series. And we're talking today about what literature does. And what is literature? What's its purpose? How do we use it as Master's people? And where is it used in your Master's work? So where would a reader expect to see your literature and why? And this is just always something to remember. Marie Curie said that she was taught that the way of progress was neither swift nor easy. And sometimes I know people get discouraged when they're doing their thesis or dissertation work. And it's just important to remember that we stand on the back of really great people who have been discouraged and sorry it was going so slow before us, but they stuck it out, and we can too. Our agenda today is to talk about literature from two different angles, in the hopes of helping you be more comfortable with how it's used. And then I'll go over a quick discussion of the tools that make working with literature easier. So let's go through ways of thinking about literature in an argument and in research. This is not as central in some master's thesis work. But it's important to remember that everything we do with logic stands on the shoulders of the Greeks. And they had a particular system of argument which is worth everyone knowing. Because at the end of the day, we want to convince people, don't we? We want them to believe what we say. We want them to find what we say credible. And if we are working in an academic environment, then there are things that we need to do that will help it be more credible. And these 4 points help a lot. So we make a claim. There is something we want to say. But that claim has to be backed up by reasons or evidence. Reasons can be your literature. The evidence can be your data. But you put things together in a well-developed chain of logic. So I have this logical chain. I've laid it out for you. Therefore, I can make this claim. And that's a warrant statement. I have this, therefore I can make this claim. But at the same time, I need to acknowledge that other people may not agree with me. And the people who don't agree with me tend to base their disagreement on this point or this point. So as an academic, well-minded, neutral person, it's important that I acknowledge the opposition and that I can conclude with a statement that reinforces the whole. Now, why is that important? It's important because, and if, as a master's student, you may not be doing formal research. You may be basing a claim upon a considered opinion of others as seen in the literature. On the other hand, if you're in the STEM field, especially if you're an engineer or computer science, you may be doing work that is very much the same as you would be doing for a doctoral work, just not as expanded. And then you would use all parts of the circle. But however it goes, we all have something we want to talk about. That's our topic. That topic leads us to consider a portion of it that is a problem or a gap or something worth studying. Then, therefore, that problem or gap sets up our purpose, which is to find out more, to investigate, to improve. And then with that, with understanding what our purpose is, we can frame our questions, which lead us through the theories we base our work on, the methodology we base our work on. how we collect our data, and how we analyze our data. That's all a one step after another logical train of thought. And if we're building a claim, our claim is the outcome of this data. The evidence is in the data itself. It's in the literature. It's in the entire logical frame that we put together through all of these. Because we do a good job of this, we can make the claims we make. Now, that's one way of looking at it. That we are in the process of doing research. We have these steps, and we guide our reader through those steps. Our literature needs to back up each one of those. So let me go back a slide. Talking about literature. Our literature establishes our topic because other people have written about it. And this is the big, broad-based, what is out there and what are they saying? And then when we drill down into that topic more, we find out what's missing or where the gaps are, and that leads us to our problem, which then we see how other people have realized that problem, and that leads us to our purpose. And then we look at the literature on how people have studied these things before, and that leads us to our methodology. So a good portion of this circle is supported by the literature and can be seen as though we were writing it in a funnel. That's the left-hand side. So the top part of the funnel is what I need to know about the topic in the field. I'm your reader. Then the next part of the funnel is I need to understand the gaps that come out, the things that aren't studied, the things that we don't know. And that leads me to understand the significance of your ideas. It wouldn't be worth doing if you were just repeating what someone else had done, unless the way you're doing it or the place you're doing it or something else about it is unique. So you have to let me understand that. What's been done before, how does yours work? That's your significance. And then literature also may define how you're doing your study. So even if you're in a situation where you are studying things that have all been written up in the past, there will be authors who discuss how that work should be done. And when you talk about the fact that you decided to do this particular thing, you can cite them as being your guides, that was an appropriate way for you to manage your academic questioning or experience. That leads you ultimately to your results. The literature doesn't show up very much in your results, but the results funnel your reader through to your findings and discussion. And then your literature comes very much back into it because it's all woven together. What was studied before, what your study is, and then we leave your work with a greater understanding of the field. That's the way this logical pattern flows together. Now, I looked at some master's thesis, and I looked at both a STEM person, an engineer, and I looked at a person in the human sciences, social sciences. So in the construction of spatial data structures, this man set up his problem in his introduction and backed up his claims. So his literature in this particular sense helps him set up the problem. So he's talking about other people who've said and done things. And then also he's used his literature to back up the claim that his methodology is the apt way to study it. Then he has a background chapter, which is an overview of the previous research and establishes the base for this work. And that is, in his field, the equivalent of a literature review. That's the essence of what a literature review does, is it overviews previous research and it establishes the base for this new work. Then his work is algorithms, and he uses literature in that chapter to refer back to the people. It's much the same as any methodological person would use literature to refer to the people who had written about that literature or about that methodology before, that said that their work was appropriate. He did the same thing with algorithms. And oftentimes we don't see any literature at all in the results chapter, but this time there was, and it was referenced back to the work of the people who he adapted into this specific context. There was nothing when he wrote about future work, and there was nothing when he wrote about conclusions. And I think it might be a mistake that he didn't refer us a little to the literature when it was about future work, but I know it's a mistake that he wrote his conclusions and didn't bother to take the time to add to how his work adds to other people's. Literature should always be in the conclusions, because at the end of the day, we want our work to be significant in the field and to the literature of the field. And if we don't draw the conclusions about how that is so, we can't count on anybody else doing it. So we help them along in our conclusion section. Now, what I hope you understand here is that it becomes literature and what goes on around us. It isn't so very different from when we are, in fact, have mastery over anything else in our lives. So when you first learn a skill, the parts of that skill are very new. I'm going to just say, you might be learning to go boating. You might be learning to kayak, for instance. You take your kayak out, you learn and it's very awkward at first. But then after a while, it becomes quite easy. And then after a while, after that, you can take on other kinds of boats. You can take on other size of boats. You can take on more difficult problems. Use of literature is very much like that. When we're in undergraduate work, pretty much all literature is used for one task. It's used to substantiate our claims. The more, though, that we become embedded in our field of knowledge, the more it becomes easy to write a paragraph, say what we want to say, and then go back and add the citations of the people on whose shoulders we stand when we say those things. Let's see how someone else says it. This education master's introduction, none. But her introduction was all first person. She was telling the story of why she studied this. Then she had a chapter that was the theoretical framework. And it was all the theories that were involved in this. And it was, I would say, some funneling, some listing and discussion, just this theory and this theory and this theory, but a little bit of awareness that the reader needs the big ones before the little ones. That led into the literature review, which clearly funneled the reader through compensation ideas to job satisfaction, the current debates in early childhood education, and what's happening around the world. There was none in her methodology. That may be a mistake too. If you have a methodology, it's useful to refer back to the people you had to read somebody's methods about how to do what you did. And so you should refer back to that. Results, there were no and then no literature. And then again in her discussion, a back and forth discussion. This was well done between the literature and the results to highlight and bring out the issues and to give evidence to the claim that this was not just for her small sample of people, but in fact, it's an issue overall. So she had 5 people and they came to these conclusions. Well, that's something, but 5 people is still only 5 people. So she used her literature discussion to make a claim that it wasn't just these 5 people. It, in fact, shows up everywhere and we ought to pay attention. So, any questions in the room? Both of you had an overview of this at another level a minute ago, so I thought because this is a master's level topic today, that it would be really useful for people who aren't as familiar with the work to think about what is the problem of literature reviews. And the problem really is, and then what are the tools that help you get past those problems? So this is very nuts and boltsies. This is very, how do you do it discussion. So the first part was, how do you think about it? Where do you put it? What is lit to your work? The second part is, how do you get it done? And the problem here is that we don't approach lit as a reader the same way we approach lit as a writer. That's really the problem, and I'll help you see why. So the process is we read. So let's just take this as our reading. We read lots of stuff, and it bubbles down, and it gets organized. We read some more. We add some more to the top, and it bubbles through. And that we compare, we do more thoughts, and some thoughts, some articles come out the other side. Looks kind of like this if I give it titles. We read anything that is even closely related to our interests. That allows us to drill down into some general themes, which then help us drill down into some specific themes, which then help us drill down into what we want to study. Now, we read all of this. And all of that shows up in, oh, by the way, if you have any, this is a link I threw in, and you have it in your handouts. You have the slides in the handouts. So if you need this link. If you don't know how to do a Boolean search, this is a very good page to teach you how. If you're not finding the literature that you want in your study, it may be because you don't know how to do Boolean search as well. And there are the searches where you put pluses and you put quotation marks around the whole thing so that you can tell the search engine more precisely, I want this, not part of this, or I want this part of this, or I want all these things together, or I want this phrase together. It'll help you get your search more refined. But because we're reading in that funnel format, we're putting together ideas kind of like a mind map or a tree. So you think, oh, here's an idea, and then it has all these sub-ideas that go with it. And here's another idea. This is, you're drawing, if you would, your own personal picture of how this part of the world works. Now, enter tool, the first tool, which is, although mind map, you might have mind mapping tools. But one very good tool that everybody needs is bibliographic software. Now, the thing about bibliographic software is that I don't care whether it's free or it comes from your university, which one it is. I use EndNote myself. I love it. But if you look, there's hundreds now. And but it must have certain abilities for it to be good, in my opinion. It must be able, you must be able to build folders or to stash a particular reference into multiple themes or multiple groups so that you can organize at least a loose organizational structure within your bibliographic software. You need to have places in the database where you can write notes, where you can copy the abstracts, where you can attach PDFs. And if you have attached PDFs, I think you need to be able to highlight them right there. And collaboration may be an issue. It'll become something more and more if it isn't now. Now in EndNote, this is what it looks like. We read, and then we list everything by authors. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see I have literally a cajillion folders. Some are under some big topics, some are under just more general. And when I read something new that's worthy of putting in my database, then I drag it into the folders that are the most appropriate. But this, notice this is still very linear. I may have folders, I may be able to click on the folder, but what would the folder give me? The folder would give me like a cluster on a mind map. And I may be able to see the authors and what they wrote, but it's alphabetically driven or it's driven by a general heading. This is not how we write. So the best we can do with this comes up with something like this, where we understand the gaps, we have a methodology, we're putting it together, but how do we write it? All right, so this is then the spreadsheet tool, and if you work with me at all, you hear me talk about it a lot. It just happens to be the way I write. So it's gotten me through several books and lots of journal articles, and I would be sadly pressed if I ever lost my thought leadership spreadsheet. Here's how it works. I decide I want to drill into a new topic. As recently I've started working on transferable skills for master's and doctoral students that who are going to actually be employed by non-academic jobs. So I'm looking at what do non-academic jobs need out of master's and doctoral level workers? What do they expect? What particular skills are they? And then I look at what the literature has seen. So we have some peer-reviewed research, some books, etc. So it's a wide range of references, about 40 in all. Now, I have 40 rows that is this author and what they said. And I have divided the columns into kind of a general column of overarching what was the main point, but then specifics of what are the soft skills they mention, what are the difficulties they mention, what are the things that help that they mention. And as I've read, those columns have expanded. So there's probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 columns, and maybe sometimes they overlap. And I may have a column that is the methodology that particular person used when they did their study. Because it may turn out, if I was trying to propel a study, that they hadn't done, nobody had done a mixed methods, or nobody had done a qualitative or something. And then that can be the gap that you fill. But also you can learn a lot about what you want to do by watching how other people did it. So the rows are each person's ideas, and the column is segmenting those ideas into the general ideas of the topic. Then the process my process while reading is the rows, but my process while writing is 100% the columns. So at that point, I don't care what this author did. I care about the themes that developed in the columns. And this works so well because I can first off, I can click on the column and I can sort the column, and then only the people who wrote to that come up. So all the people who didn't write about that thing don't even show up in my ideas. Very easy to use. And then I read it, and from reading a column of ideas, you can build a continuum in your mind. You can synthesize the ideas more easily, and you can structure your writing. And then you can just kind of go through and check off the ones you want to use. And if you're thinking about gaps, if you're needing to justify your work, then you can also look at a column from a point of view of what's not there. Okay, so couple of really good tools. Now, what do you do with those good tools? How do you know when you're writing a literature review, say, when you're writing up your literature, how do you know what to include? Well, what is included needs to match one-to-one the rest of your work. So I'm going to use a formal research design as an example. And this is a tool on any doctoral net site. It's one of the self-assessments. It's the logic design tool, or it's sometimes called the correspondence between lit and methodology. And there's 3 boxes. You fill out the boxes. The first box is what's your topic. The second box is who are you going to ask, and the third box is how are you going to ask them, and population and sample essentially. So you fill out those boxes, and you get to you bring up questions, and you keep massaging your words until you can say yes to all the questions. So, for instance, it might say, does your topic include information about the place it will be? And if it didn't, then you'd go back in and you'd add the place into your topic statement. You just follow the examples, the questions. Then you have to, it will guide you to make sure all 3 boxes are similar, so that the question asked in this box is answerable by the topic answered in this box is answerable by the questions in this one, and if you ask the questions of the people you discussed in the third. That's all good. It sets it up. In a few sentences, you've got your research design sorted out. Then you click the last box, and it asks you what literature needs to be there. And the literature that needs to be there is in the sentences all the way through. So if your topic statement was about leadership in this environment, you'd need to have literature on that kind of on leadership in general, on that kind of leadership in specific, and on leadership or anything known about the intricacies of that environment for the third. If you were going to ask African American leaders, then what is known about African American leaders would need to be part of your lit. If you were going to use action research, then action research would need to be part of your lit. So the things that are in the boxes actually become very important to be considerations during the lit review. It kind of gets the what is going to be there. Now, that's only a stepping stone to actually writing the lit review, because then you still need the funnel of the broader bases and where you want your reader to go. There's still other considerations. And you will find those other considerations if we have done a lot of work on this. And if you go to the resource panel in any Doctoral Net portal, or if you go to YouTube and the Doctoral Net site, and you look for lit, just type in lit, because it could be literature in some ways, not in others. I know that I did at least part 1 and part 2 earlier this year, but there will be lots of options as we have looked at this challenge over the course of time several times. Other things you might consider that are useful to you. There will be maps through the process. For those of you who are lucky enough to have a university supporting you, if you're a master's student, then you'll have a master's navigation point on the website that's powered by Doctoral Net with your university, and that will have a map in it, and that will have milestone checklist in it. If you need resources on a particular topic, you can always email Margie at doctoralnet.com. She'll come back to you within a couple of days and send you a list of things you could consider. Don't forget the past webinars. And if you want to upgrade your academic writing at the same time you start a good writing habit and you learn some tricks of the trade, we highly recommend the 30-day writing challenge. Oh, and Annaline mentions that she started playing with the self-assessment tools. the automations are another, we call them both things. I think they're excellent. I think they give you a sense that just going through the criteria at the bottom of a self-assessment makes you think about your work in the way that your supervisor or committee chair think about your work. And so they are useful. And also they can be used as PDFs, and you can take them on to that person for a conversation if you have the kind of if you have that as a potential. So we've come to the time where actually, I was pretty quick today. But was this helpful? Did it help you be more comfortable with how literature is used? Did it help you understand why and how to include it? And was it useful, the discussion of the tools that make working with lit easier? If the two in the room would give me a 1 through 5 kind of rating, that would be useful. And for those of you watching by recording, then we'll be able to. So Annaline says it was 4, usefulness, excellent. Annaline, what might have made it better? And when I turn off the recording, I'll help you sort out the getting access to previous webinars thing. Any ideas about what I could have included? Anytime you're watching by recording and you have ideas, we are very much a peer-reviewed environment and are always interested in and will respond by taking them on board what students tell us make things more helpful. And what's up at Doctoral Net? We have an application coming, an app coming for both iPhone and Android. Should be here in September. It will give you notifications and make it easy for you to opt into things on your phone. It won't be the full content. It'll be opt-ins and what they call a slim app. We have 2 more webinars in August. Actually, the first one's a mistake. The Getting Your Question Answered is for the doctoral level on the 15th. The master's one on the 15th has to do with how you drive your point. So we're going to, again, look at some other master's work. We're going to see how did they get their point through. Sometimes we call this the golden thread. Other times we call it the argument. And then on August 22nd, we're going to discuss abstracts. And on August 29th, we're going to discuss presentations. We do have some other series going on, a Let's Get Published series and a series for doctors that are in the ABD systems. So that takes care of that. Thank you for watching by recording. I will turn this off now. And now that the recording is off,